I thought I'd share a little bit of my history of video game experience. Um, and I'm going to do consoles first and then portable systems, which, just so you know, I refer to consoles now as desktop consoles versus portable consoles. So that's how it shall be referred to herein. The very first desktop console that I ever had was the original Nintendo Entertainment System. Uh, One of my relatives bought that for me when I was very young. Very young. Um, I don't even remember when we got it. I don't think I was ever told when we got it. Anyway, it's the very first system I've ever had. We had Mario 1 slash Duck Hunt, that 2-in-1 cartridge that came with every game, every system, excuse me, much like Wii Sports now comes for the Wii. We had Donkey Kong, Dig Dug, Burger Time, Galaga, Mario 2 and Mario 3. I don't remember if I mentioned those already. Maybe I did. Let's see. Dr. Mario. We had Dr. Mario. And I love Dr. Mario. Those are all the ones that I can remember off the top of my head. But yeah, those were a lot of fun. Oh, I think did I mention Dig Dug? We also had Dig Dug. So yeah, that was my very first desktop console. The next one was the Super Nintendo. Now, what got me into the Super Nintendo was because my best friend had one. He probably got his when it first came out because it seemed to me like all of his games were new. I didn't recall him purchasing used, but a couple of years later I decided to get one for myself. The mini Super Nintendo, the one that kind of took on the design trend to the Nintendo 64 almost, in terms of styling. And yeah, my Super Nintendo, the bulk of our games were purchased used. But I think the Mini actually was a better system than the original, only because of the fact that you could get it in tighter spots. And then in 1996, the big moment arrived. Everybody knows what that is. The Nintendo 64. The Nintendo 64, we got two games with it to begin with. We got Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and Top Gear Rally. And, of course, Zelda Ocarina of Time was the best Zelda game of all time. The Nintendo 64 is still in perfect shape today. Absolutely no issues with it. Same with the Super Nintendo. It's also in perfect shape, no issues with it. So we had the Nintendo 64 for several years, and then in 2000, well, we still have it. In 2001, we got a GameCube. The very first game disc we got for it was Luigi's Mansion. And we expanded on all of the libraries. Now I note that I did mention the games that we got for the Nintendo Entertainment System. You're probably wondering why I didn't list all the games for all the systems. Well, we'd be here forever if I did that, so that's why I'm not going to bother doing that. But yeah, the GameCube was our last desktop console. We haven't had a new system since 2001. I am considering getting a Wii for Christmas, but we've been looking at that for the past 2 years and have ultimately failed to get one, so I'm not getting my hopes up. Now on to portables. The very first portable I had was a Nintendo. Well, I didn't have it, but my cousin did. A Nintendo Game Boy. And if I remember correctly, I think I was hooked on that. Now remember, I'm getting this off the top of my head, and I'm a little bit fuzzy on the exact details. But anyway, he had a Nintendo Game Boy, and I wanted one. I wanted a Game Boy. I wanted one right when the Game Boy Pockets came out, and I wanted the original Game Boy just for the nostalgia value. Unfortunately, none could be found. So, I got a Game Boy Pocket. Very first Game Boy I ever had. I have a full review video on the Game Boy Pocket if you wish to see that. And I had the Game Boy Pocket for several years. The very first game I ever had for it, I believe, was Tetris. And I went ahead and expanded on the Game Boy Pocket, or Game Boy Library, I should say, and have oodles of games for it. We have enough games to where it takes up literally a full box of Christmas lights just to store them. So yeah, we were major gamers back when the Game Boy Pocket was around. When I say we, incidentally, I mean me and my brother. We were major gamers back then. Game Boy Pocket, after that, was the Game Boy Color. Now, this was not the Game Boy Color I wanted originally. I'm going to tell you right now that I wanted the limited edition Pokemon one that came with Pokemon Yellow bundled. They didn't have any of those in stock, unfortunately. So, I ended up with this one. I'm still perfectly happy with it. I mean, for the amount of time that I've kept this, I'd say it's in near mint condition. The Game Boy Color, one of my favorite games for the Game Boy Color would have to be Super Mario Deluxe. But again, if I were to mention all the games that I have for all the systems, we'd be here all day. So I might mention a game or two here or there for a system, like I did for the Super Nintendo, or the NES, excuse me. But I'm not going to mention all of them. If I mentioned that already, I'm sorry. I'm doing this impromptu and completely unscripted. So if I repeat something twice or thrice, I apologize. So Game Boy Color, I had that for a good long while, and obviously I still have it. It doesn't have any batteries in it, but I can assure you, if it did, it would be in perfect working order. Yeah, it still works. Perfect working order, no problems. Then, and I had it all throughout middle school, and then at the very beginning of high school, I got a reward for doing so well in middle school and entering into a very prestigious high school, one of the top in the area for me. I got this Game Boy Advance. This Game Boy Advance is in near mint condition, with the exception of a couple of scuff marks and some print issues on the back. But the Game Boy Advance, one of the very first things I noticed about the Game Boy Advance was how big the cartridge was compared to a traditional Game Boy cartridge. I mean, take a look at this thing. It's roughly, it's not even half the size. Let me there we go. Now you can see it better. It was not even half the size of a Game Boy cartridge. This little thing contains a game equivalent to something that you would find on the Super Nintendo. And then finally, the very last system I got in terms of the portable market was the Game Boy Advance SP. Now, I already have a Game Boy Advance, so you might be wondering, why do I need a Game Boy Advance SP? I'm visually impaired. Any improvements they can make in the screen size, or anything such as a backlight, would be tremendous help. Guess what? The Game Boy Advance SP had a backlight. Well, not exactly a backlight, but it was still a lit screen. A lit screen. And that was very nice, because before, what I would do is I would take the system and put it under, see if I can demonstrate this. I would put it under the light. Oh wait, there we go. I would put it under the light so that I could see it better. If you couldn't really get that, I apologize. Trying to do this on camera is not easy. But yeah, I would have to put it under the light and still squint to see it. I was constantly adjusting the brightness. Well, I wouldn't say squint, but yeah, I was constantly adjusting the brightness. So the Game Boy Advance SP was a major, major help. It was a lot better than all of my Game Boys because of that backlight. Anyway, that's a history of my experience with game systems, both portable and desktop. As you can tell, I was 100% Nintendo. You're welcome to reply with your own video response of your experience. I'd love to hear it. Thank you for watching. I look forward to your comments. No bashing, please. And have a nice evening.